Hi, it's Yumi Steins from the Ladies We Need to Talk podcast. If you've never heard it before, let me explain it to you. Ladies We Need to Talk is a must listen that goes deep on the stuff that really matters to women. If it's a topic going off in your group chat, we're across it with love, science and real-life women telling their stories, from perimenopause to the mental load, fertility to friendship. Find Ladies We Need to Talk in the ABC Listen app.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
If you look at things from a certain angle, the most endangered group of people in any community are its children. Children need to be protected from predatory or negligent adults. They're open to the cruelest forms of exploitation, simply because they don't have the worldliness and experience of adults. And they have to live on trust and goodwill. And this is why the United Nations ratified an international convention on the rights of the child. It's a convention that's designed to protect kids, effectively by making mistreatment of them illegal and by setting out benchmarks to educate them and keep them safe. Every nation in the world has signed up to this convention except one, and we'll get to that later. Paula Gerber is here today. Paula is a lawyer who started out in the rough, tough world of construction law. And it took a nasty motorbike accident to make Paula wonder, what the hell am I doing with my life? I didn't go into the law to make life easier for property developers. And so Paula did a PhD in human rights, specifically on the rights of children. Today, Paula is a lecturer at Monash University Law School. Hi, Paula.
Hi, Richard.
Are the rights of children enshrined in Australian law in any kind of consistent or coherent way?
Not at all. We refer to it as a patchwork quilt approach. So there are some Australian states and territories that do it better than others. There's a bit in the Family Law Act, but there is not a Children's Rights Act in Australia, like there is a Race Discrimination Act after we signed the Race Discrimination Treaty, a Disability Discrimination Act after we signed the Disability Discrimination Treaty, the Sex Discrimination Act after we signed other human rights instruments. But we signed and ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we have not done anything about it. We signed it in 1990, so the children who were born at the time of that treaty ratification by Australia are now 35. They probably having or already have their own children, and yet still that treaty is not part of Australian law.
Given that we're talking about changes on a state-to-state and territory basis, do you think that reflects a different view of children, a different view of the nature of children between the different states and territories of Australia?
It seems to. It varies according to who's in power. So Queensland recently enacted the Human Rights Act up there. They were only the third state or territory to do it in Australia after the Victoria and the ACT. But now they have gone exactly in the opposite direction with increasing penalties for children. Children can be criminally responsible at the age of 10 in Queensland, and they can be subjected to long prison sentences and criminal records that follow them into adulthood. So that, I'd say, is one of the worst states. Northern Territory's not great as well. ACT has raised the age of criminal responsibility to 14. So it seems to suggest that change happens according to who's in power.
The UN has this convention on the rights of children, like I said. What kind of rights does it actually stipulate? Does it lay out?
It's a very comprehensive treaty. So it has some foundational principles like non-discrimination. You cannot discriminate against children based on their race, religion, the fact that they've got gay parents, the fact that they're refugees. You must always take the best interests of the child into account when making any decisions that affect children. You must listen to children. They have a voice. They have a right under Article 12 to be their views taken into account in decisions that affect them. And then you've got principles like right to health, right to education, right not to be treated violently, not to be enlisted as a child soldier, a very comprehensive treaty.
Which is this country that has not signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child?
Shamefully, it is the United States.
Why is the United States... Like, there's a rights culture there. They have a Bill of Rights. Maybe they feel they don't need one because they have an existing Bill of Rights?
There is a bit of exceptionalism that international law doesn't apply to them. They also have not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which, again, 191 other countries have ratified.
They've not signed up for the International Court of Justice either, have they?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. The International Criminal Court, they feel that they're above international law, it seems. And this has been the case for decades. But when it comes to children's rights, there is a lot of powerful lobbies going on, constantly writing to senators saying, don't you dare ratify this treaty because it will limit our parental rights. And they're very much into parental rights over there, more than they are children's rights.
Are they worried that the convention will direct government authorities to step in and override parental decisions? Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, and parental freedom to make those decisions. So one of the rights in the convention is Articles 28 and 29, which says every child has a right to education, and that education should include education about children's rights and about respect for people who are different from you and respect for the environment. And parents are saying, well, we want to homeschool our kids, and how dare you tell us what we have to teach our children? So that's one of the articles that they object to. They object to the definition of a child, which is from birth to 18. They say it should be from conception to 18.
All right, there can be no agreement in the United States about how to define a child then. Is that what you mean?
It's as fundamental as that. But a lot of other countries have signed on to this treaty and said, we don't agree with everything in it. We will make what's called a reservation. So we will agree to all of this treaty except for the definition of children, or except for, in the case of Saudi Arabia, that a child can change their religion, because we don't think they can. So you can still sign on to a treaty without agreeing to every single word in it. But America's not even doing that.
You have countries that have signed this charter that will not only allow but absolutely perfectly tolerate child brides, for example. Does that make them hypocritical to sign a convention? That's really not got the best interest of the child at heart, has it? Or they argue otherwise?
Well, we accept that nobody is fully complying with this treaty. It's just a question of degrees about how close they're getting to fully implementing it. So every 5 years, if you've ratified this treaty, your implementation of it gets reviewed by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and they will give you a series of recommendations. And that might be, Australia, we want you to raise the age of criminal responsibility. You're out of sync with globally accepted standards for the age at which children should be held to be criminally responsible for their actions. So every state gets recommendations tailored to them, and in some cases it might be you need to raise the age at which children can get married.
The UN Charter stipulates something really interesting. Well, apart from stipulating the right to protection from harmful work, protection from harmful drugs, protection from sexual abuse, it also enshrines the right to live. That's a really interesting phrase. Would such a provision in some people's minds in the United States conflict with their constitutional right to bear arms, particularly after, repeated school massacres?
Yes, there are some fundamental rights in human rights law that cannot be abrogated, often rights can be limited. Your right to free speech is limited by defamation laws, for example. But the right to life cannot be limited. It is something that must be respected in times of war, in times of peace, in times of wealth, in times of poverty. You must always respect the right to life. But
right, it's an overriding right.
It's an overriding...
Right. It's not like the right to freedom of speech, which can be contested by other rights.
Yes.
It's an overriding, utterly compelling right. In other words.
Exactly. And when you have children being massacred in schools, then clearly that is conflicting, very much so, with their right to life.
Now, your huge influence in joining the law was your dad, Paul Gerber. Tell me a bit more about him. What kind of a man was your dad, Paul Gerber?
He was a very, very interesting, smart, witty man. He was born in Germany and on Kristallnacht. As a young Jewish boy, he and his mother fled Nazi Germany, fled Cologne, and made it to Amsterdam.
How did they get out? That must have been really hard. This is 38, isn't it?
This is 38, and his mother was born in Belgium, and if she divorced her husband, she could reclaim her Belgium citizenship. So she was no longer a German citizen, and she could then leave with her child to go across the border into Amsterdam. There may have also been a bit of bribery going on of border guards, but she made it to Amsterdam, and Australia's refugee quota for German refugees was full, but it wasn't for Flemish refugees from Belgium. So they were applying for refugee status in Mexico and Australia came through first.
So their lives were saved.
Their lives were saved.
Absolutely.
And my father's father died in Auschwitz, and much of the rest of his family, all his grandparents and most of his aunts and uncles, etc., all perished. But he came to Australia 14 years old, not speaking a word of English.
Did he love Australia for that, I wonder?
He absolutely did. And he decided that he was going to be a lawyer, and ultimately he wanted to be a judge because his father had been a judge in Germany, and one of the first things that Hitler did was remove Jews from all positions of power. So overnight his dad went from being a judicial officer to being unemployed. And so Dad relished the opportunity to pursue the same career and reach the same level that had been taken from his father.
So your dad became a lawyer, a defence lawyer, and a very energetic one. Growing up, did you spend time with your dad as he was going about his lawyering in such cases?
Absolutely. I was his shadow, and that include following him to court. It include going with him on the weekends to Bogger Road Prison in Brisbane when he was interviewing clients.
So were you into that, or were you going, Dad, I want to sit at home and watch Neighbours instead, or what? Were you absolutely into this?
No, I thought this was fascinating. It made for good stories to tell at school on Monday morning about, I didn't go to the football on the weekend.
It was at Bogger Road.
Yeah, it was Bogger Road.
Wow. And what do you remember of going into Bogger Road Jail as a little girl with your dad?
I remember that some of the clients that he was representing were then on the front page of the newspaper. So the ones that I really remember are Stewart and Finch. In 1973, there was the Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub fire where 15 people died, and Stewart and Finch were charged with murder, and my father represented them. And one story I remember very clearly was that he'd left with Stewart some papers to read, and they had a paperclip on them, and Stewart and Finch claimed till their dying days that they were innocent, and they protested their innocence constantly. And Stewart took the paperclip from the papers that my father had left with him and sewed his lips together with them. And at other times he swallowed wire crosses. So I remember all these stories from my childhood.
And was your dad talking to you about these cases and explaining how the law works to you, giving an education in the law as he was doing all of this?
Absolutely. We sat around the dinner table discussing all of his cases and the arguments that he was making to try and to get people off. And one of his favourite arguments was that they were unfit to stand trial because of mental incapacity. And he was quite successful at this, and many of his clients would end up at Wollston Park, which was the mental health psychiatric institution. And I remember clearly being driven to school for a few days and picked up in a police car because one of his clients had escaped from Wollston Park, and they were a bit worried that they were going to come after him or his children because they were unhappy about having ended up there. So that was a bit of excitement as well.
Did he have a philosophy about the law?
The law was probably his religion, and it was a tool that you used to obtain justice. And I think that was probably very much informed by the fact that, when he came to Australia, he was stateless because he'd been stripped of his citizenship as a Jew in Germany. So he had a very strong moral compass.
And what about you? Did you have an evolving philosophy of the law, or at that age as well? The law's not perfect, but it's kind of all we got, isn't it? And it's malleable. You can change it. I don't know. What's your view on all that?
My view is that it is, yes, it's not perfect. There's lots of faults with it, and there's lots of room for improvement. But it is a fabulous tool for trying to create equality and fairness and non-discrimination in society. And certainly in all my lectures, I teach from a reform perspective. This is what the law is, but how can we make it better?
The law's surely also there to protect us from crime as well, isn't it?
It is, but I think we need to look at why people are committing crimes and to take a proactive, preventative approach. So Can we make society safer by using principles of restorative justice, which mean that, instead of spending money on jails and locking people up, if you took that money and you spent it on education and on providing better facilities for youth, would we actually reduce the crime rate? And there's lots of evidence that we would.
Does that reflect the view that people are fundamentally good?
Yes.
Do you think they are?
I absolutely think they are, but there's always exceptions to every rule.
Have you not met psychopaths in your life? I have. And I'm seriously nasty people who are completely without empathy.
I have met those, and I think they're the exception. And I will always assume that someone is good until they prove me otherwise.
Oh, hasn't that hurt you pretty bad in the past?
It certainly has. It certainly has in time, but I'd rather have that approach than assume that everyone is inherently evil or capable of hurting me.
So is it a kind of necessary wishful thinking, or is it the truth to you then?
I think it is the truth in my case. I've certainly come across people who have harmed me, but I think if you expect good of people, they tend to live up to that as a general rule.
Given that your dad was a defence lawyer, how grateful were his clients when he managed to get them off the hook?
Incredibly grateful. We had some amazing experiences as children. I remember he got a medical student off a drug charge that would have stopped him getting admitted to practice as a doctor, and the family had a station out in central Queensland, and they insisted that, we all fly out there for a weekend at their expense. So they sent down their plane and we went out there, and what I remember two things most about that. One was that they had one of those lights that had dots at the end, big fronds, and they changed colour. And we were mesmerised by this. And we went back home, we talked about it, and my parents hated that sort of stuff. They were into antiques. And the family sent down a package that had one of these lights in it. And my parents didn't let us see it. They took it straight back to David Jones or wherever. And we went out to this property again a couple of months later, and again oohed and ahed over this light. And my father had to try and somehow make up a reason why we were oohing and ahhing so much when we had one of our own.
You had one of your own. It used to be said, this is, Queensland in the 70s, there was a running joke that said you could get busted by the cops in Queensland in the 70s for hesitating with intent to loiter.
Absolutely.
But when you say a drugs charge, what kind of a drugs charge did this guy have?
Possession of marijuana. And
is that it?
That was in Queensland in the 70s. That was a big deal. And the defence was that the police had rocked up at his house and he had seen them coming and had flushed the marijuana down the toilet. The police had gone through the sewage system and retrieved this as evidence.
No. Really?
Seriously. And so that they could pursue charges against him. And my father's defence was that possession required intent to possess, and he clearly did not have intention to possess. He had intended to dispossess himself of these drugs and got off on that one. By
flushing him down the toilet?
Yes. Another one of his defences was it was possession of seeds of marijuana, and that was a criminal offence, but they hadn't proved that the seeds were capable of germinating, and that therefore meant that they could have just been dead seeds, which wasn't a criminal offence. So he was very much into using the technicalities of the criminal law to help his clients.
Oh, the police must have hated him for that.
Oh, very much so.
Your father took the family over to Germany for a period when you were little. Why did he want to take you to Germany, of all places?
The story he tells that he wanted to see if he hated the Germans as much as he thought he did. And the conclusion he reached was that he did.
Really?
Yes. But he did his doctorate over there, and we lived in Cologne for a year, which was where he spent his childhood. And we were thrown into school, not speaking a word of German, but becoming fluent in it and having a great time and a very different experience. We'd never, growing up in Queensland, we'd never seen snow before. I remember my brother, when we arrived, walking out barefoot into the snow and running back into the house screaming in pain.
Have you kept your German language?
Not to any great extent. My father did insist that we, every year throughout our schooling, enter the Goethe competition. So I can recite a poem in German Der Werwolf, ein Werwolf eines Nachts entwich von Weib und Kind und sich begab an eines Dorfschullehrers Grab und bat ihm, bitte beuge mich. And
That's
on it
about a
goes.
werewolf at night or something?
It is
that right?
about a werewolf at night, about grammar, about future and present and past tense of werewolf, which apparently is very funny, but as a child I didn't see the humour in it. I thought it was torture.
The Germans famous for their humour.
Yes.
How about your mother? Were you as close with her as you were with your dad?
No, my dad and I shared a very close bond from early on, and my mother and I not so much. I think I was a very strong-willed child who knew what I wanted to do, and I've never been good at following rules, so that made it difficult for my mother, especially with, she had 3 children under 3. I've got an older sister and brother, and yes, we didn't always see eye to eye.
So you were clearly going to be a lawyer just like your dad with the childhood you'd had, and so you went to study law in Queensland at the same time as your brother was studying law. How did that work out, Paula?
My brother would say it worked out better for him than for me. I was quite a nerdy student, and I'd go every weekend into the law library and, write up my notes and prepare for the exams. And at the last week of semester, my brother would come along and ask for copies of all my notes, and I'd give them to him. And many, many, many years later, I ran into someone, a lawyer, who said, Paula Gerber, I got through law school because of you. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, your notes were fantastic. I'm like, I don't know you. How did you have my notes? He said, your brother sold them.
So you not only got yourself through law school, you got a whole cohort of people through as well. That was very big of you, Paula. That was
if only I knew that's what I was doing.
He might have given you a piece of the action at very least, I would have thought.
You'd think so.
So after you graduated, you moved to the UK for a while and then the United States, specialising in construction law. That's something you just kind of fell into?
Indeed. I initially was doing banking litigation and not enjoying it much. And I saw this sign on a tube when I was riding to work that said, come and spend a summer working in a summer camp in California. And I thought that sounded good, so I quit my job and went and worked as a camp counsellor at Camp Shalom in Malibu. And I thought, this is great, I want to stay here, but I'll never get a green card for the US. So I went to Toronto, next best thing, and I worked with, or I applied for a job with Baker and McKenzie, who were then known as the McDonald's of the legal profession because they had offices everywhere. And they said, yes, we'll take you for our banking litigation practice, but it'll take us 3 months to get you a work permit. So go back to London where we know you can stay and work, and we'll send for you when we get the visa. Well, 3 months later, Canadian Immigration contacted me and said, the last thing we want is more lawyers. We're not going to give you a Canadian permit. And I was enjoying Baker McKenzie in London, so I said, can I stay? And they said, well, the only opening we've got is that we're going to set up a construction law practice. Would you like to be the junior solicitor helping with that? And I said, sure, but I don't know much about construction law. And they said, no problem. There's a brand new master's starting at King's College. We'll pay for you to do the master's in construction law part-time at King's.
So this is the rough, tough world of property developers, is it?
This is.
Who don't like hearing no for an answer. They've got a very long history of that in this country in particular, of course. They don't like getting rebuffed. Not many people do, of course, but property developers tend to let you know all about it if you say no to them. Is this the world?
Indeed, and they also don't like hearing no from a woman. So I remember being told to go down to a construction site at Canary Wharf, which was being built at the time, had to get a witness statement from a gentleman. And I turned up at this construction site in my suit with, it was the 1980s, big shoulder pads and a briefcase. And the security guard at the gate said, you must be the stripper.
Oh, my God.
And they had organised a stripper to come at the same time to farewell a guy as a solicitor. But the only reason he thought a woman would be coming on site is if she was the stripper.
What did you say?
I didn't know whether to be flattered or offended.
Right.
I just went, no, I'm the solicitor. And
of course, soliciting means all sorts of things.
It has different meanings, yes.
Okay, so after a decade overseas, you moved back to Australia and moved to Melbourne this time and started teaching construction law at Melbourne University. Became a partner in a law firm. You're probably making a ton of money, working very hard, but making a ton of money. How did you find your way from there to human rights law, of all things?
I was working very hard as a partner. It had been what I'd been aspiring to my whole career is, you're on this treadmill, you are aspiring to be a partner, and I got there and then I thought, this is it. I'm just doing more of the same. I'm still recording my time in 6-minute units. I'm working 6 or 7 days a week. And on a Saturday, I'd been in the office ploughing away at a big case that was coming up for trial. And when I left in the evening, it had been sunny and dry in the morning. In the evening, it was dark and raining. And I was riding a motorbike and I went home and my wheel slipped on a tram track that was wet and I ended up in hospital. And the first day, the firm sent me flowers, and the second day they sent me a box of files to work on. And I thought I could have died for the sake of, this $6 million piece of litigation, which I really didn't care who won or lost. So I thought I've got to do something else. I've got to change my life. And I looked at, would I go back overseas and teach English as a second language? Would I do a MBA? Ideas that were about taking me out of the law. And then a friend of mine said, you still love the law, you just don't like practicing as a construction lawyer. Find another area of law that, you like. And so I thought that had some merit to it. I enrolled in a master's at Monash part-time while still being a partner in the law firm. And the first subject I did was international human rights law. And I thought, yep, this is what I'm going to do.
Why?
Because I had experienced so much discrimination during my life. I'd seen it through my father and him being uprooted and having to start a new life in Australia. I was a lesbian and I'd had discrimination against me on the basis of my sexual orientation. Working in construction, I'd had misogyny and discrimination because I was a woman. And I saw all these wrongs and I saw international human rights law as something that could be used to address those wrongs. So it felt very personal.
You were sick to death of that?
Yes.
Very much so.
I was, and I was ready to stand up and have a voice and fight for rights.
Podcast, broadcast, conversations with Richard Fidler.
One of the rights, just going back to the UN Covenant on the Rights of the Child, stipulates that the child has a right to be safe. What does that oblige, given that we're obliged to abide by UN covenants, or governments are, what does that oblige governments to do in this country?
Well, it requires governments to enact laws that protect children and look after their rights. And we're clearly not doing that in Australia. But it does require that the approach taken is the best interest of the child. We still have a lot this idea of taking a protectionist or welfare approach, that it's our job to look after and protect children rather than enable and empower them to look after themselves as they mature and grow.
But how can they do that? They're kids. They're not, well, the younger they are particularly, not highly empowered to make good decisions or to be easily influenced by people who are saying you should do this or you should do that, to be advised by people who may not have their best interests at heart.
Well, that's right, but that applies also to people who have intellectual disabilities. It applies to people who are ageing and perhaps developing Alzheimer's and dementia or losing their mental faculties. We don't say to them, well, now you don't have any rights and any voice and any capacity to make a decision. So there's something called the heart ladder of participation, which is the greater a child's cognitive ability and maturity is, the more we have to listen to them. And one of the things that I think Australia really needs to address is to prohibit corporal punishment. And in Queensland schools, non-government schools, it is still permitted for a teacher to use, in quotation marks, reasonable force to discipline a child. We should not be teaching our children that violence can be used to try and control someone. Because if they grow up being hit by their parents or caned by their teachers because they're perceived to be misbehaving or not complying, then of course they grow up thinking, well, the way you get someone to do what you want is you use violence. And in countries where corporal punishment has been banned, we see much lower rates of family violence.
When you have a law that stipulates the state must step in to support the rights of a child in this matter. The law's a pretty blunt instrument most of the time, isn't it? And in circumstances where you have families, parents who want to make a decision that might not be totally in sync with the law, the families are much more likely to have an on-the-ground appreciation of the complexity of the circumstances that surround age, mental health of the child, of course, whether there's one or two parents around or no parents at all. Is it something we have to be really careful of, using the blunt instrument of the law and state power to intrude into these situations?
You're absolutely right. The law is a blunt instrument. And I used to think that if we just got the law right, then everything would be fine. We'd have, a rights-respecting society and we'd, dance off into the sunset with lollipops and rainbows. I've come to realise that the law is just one very small piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And you must, if you're going to enact changes in the law, you must simultaneously spend a lot of time and resources and money educating people. A classic example of this is South Africa. South Africa was the first country in the world to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in their constitution. Nelson Mandela did that in 1995. And yet, today, South Africa is still one of the most dangerous places to be gay. There's corrective rape of lesbians. There's murder and homophobic hate crimes against gays.
What do you mean by corrective rape against lesbians?
It means that there is an attitude that a woman is a lesbian just because she hasn't had good sex with a man. And so I'm going to show you what you should be like. I'll rape you, but in their mind, I'm teaching you how to have sex with a man. So the law in South Africa is great, but it hasn't translated to reform. So if we are going to prohibit corporal punishment in Australia, the law is one small part of that, and the awareness raising and the education that goes with that, the training, the teaching is integral to that being a successful reform.
The law sits on top of culture, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And the culture, depending on what the law is like and who's implementing it and how it's administered, will have a degree of respect for the law that will ensure its success. I mean, that's a kind of a conversation between a people and the legal system that goes on all the time, isn't it?
Yes, there's actually a term for it. It's called demisprudence. The law and culture have to be in sync. If the law moves faster than societal attitudes, it's not going to be effective. And if the law doesn't keep up with societal attitudes, again, you don't have a balanced community. So we have to make sure that whenever we're changing the law, we're bringing people along with us. The American Civil Liberties Union used to spend about 80% of their budget on lawyers. Now they spend about 80% on comms and on marketing and on education because they realise there's no point winning the cases in the US Supreme Court if people don't understand and respect those decisions and agree with them.
Is part of it knowing which kind of political conversations need to go through the courts and which ones need to go through the parliament? It's interesting to see the different fates, I'm moving away from children here, of abortion law reform in the United States, which was achieved by a Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade. But in Australia, it went through the parliaments and seems to be it's not uncontested, but it doesn't seem to be as seriously contested as in the United States because it went through the courts rather than through the parliament.
Well, I think it's actually always both. It's a conversation between politicians and between judges. So politicians enact the legislation and then judges interpret it. And in Queensland, we had for a while the judges going, actually, no, Parliament, you are allowed to criminalise abortion and take all these really regressive, horrible, harmful steps against women to stop them accessing termination. In other jurisdictions, the courts looked at the same law and said, actually, that's a breach of women's rights to bodily autonomy and to reproductive freedom. So it is about the conversation between the judges and Parliament, and depending on who's in the court, that decision can go different ways.
Just coming back to children now, where are we at with the minimum age for criminal responsibility in Australia as it goes across the states and territories?
ACT is at the forefront there, and as they often are, and the age of criminal responsibility there is 14, which is in accordance with what the UN says it should be. That is the minimum age at which children have the cognitive, the neurological development to know right from wrong.
So if a 14-year-old commits murder, for example, they can go to jail for that or some kind of juvenile corrective institution for that?
Yes.
But other places like the Northern Territory or Queensland?
The Northern Territory it used to be 12 and they've just gone back to 10. And this, in my view, is completely the wrong approach, both in terms of the children's rights and their best interests, but also it's not protecting society. Scotland now does not have any teenagers in jail, which is a phenomenal statistic. And the reason for that is that they said locking kids up is clearly not helping us. And they had one of the highest homicide rates in the world. And they said, we've got to do things differently. We're going to treat this as a public health issue. And they did things like they got the police to round up 100 kids who were members of gangs. They brought them to a courtroom. And in that courtroom, they had a mother say what it was like to lose their son to gang violence. They had doctors talk about the lifetime trauma of children having knife wounds. And then they said to kids, do you want to do things differently? You can volunteer with us and we'll give you all these opportunities to change the course of your life. And the majority of kids in that courtroom put up their hands. And it took a couple of years, but it didn't take a generation. So we need to be giving children different opportunities, listening to children about how they want to do things differently.
You were talking before about the right of a child to make their opinions known or to articulate what they want for themselves through the law. That still seems like a really hard thing for me to know how that might work in reality. Like as I said, children aren't as worldly. That changes as they go older. They can be influenced by adults who might not have their best interests at heart. How have you seen that work in other jurisdictions or even within Australia where children are consulted in these manners?
We have things like children's parliaments, where if you are going to do some urban planning in a new suburb, you might get a group of children together for a facilitated conversation about what they think are the priorities in this new suburb. And it might not be, a new grand big shopping mall. It might be that they want parks to play in. They want bike paths that they can ride their bikes safely. They want sports grounds. They want swimming pools. And so it's not that they get to make the decision, but they get to have a say and express their opinions. And then it's up to adults as to the extent to which they listen to those opinions or not.
So going back to your story, your family story, around about the same time you were making the pivot from construction law it's got to be one of the most amazing legal pivots of all time, by the way. I just think that's such a hard-ass world into, well, I suppose it's a kind of a different kind of hard-ass world, the rights of children, isn't it, to defending human rights. Around about this time, your dad moved in with you. How and why did that happen?
Yes. My father retired from the bench. It was mandatory retirement for judges at 70. He then got reappointed every year for a one-year contract and could continue doing the work that he loved. And when he got to 75, they said, actually, it's time to hang up your boots and move on. And he did not make an easy transition into retirement. He played a lot of bridge, but really he was not particularly happy with his life. And at the age of 80, he decided he was going to move from Brisbane to Melbourne. And came and lived with me. And
what about the marriage, though? He was married to your mum, wasn't he?
He was. They had an amicable separation. And
did she not like having him around the home? Was that part of it?
As a creature of their times, the home had been her domain, and having her husband there 24/7 was something that was a difficult adjustment for her too.
Having cups of tea around the house, right? So that was hard. So he moved to Melbourne and moved in with you. Were you happy about that?
I was, having left Queensland when I got admitted as a solicitor and not lived there ever since. It was wonderful to have this opportunity to spend endless time with him.
And how old was he at this stage?
He was 80.
80 years old. And so flat sharing with a geriatric dad, was that tricky or was it fine?
He had all his mental faculties. He was still very physically fit as well. And it worked out incredibly well. I was writing lots of books at the time and articles, and I got him to be my editor and proofreader. Some of his suggestions I did not agree to, but many were very helpful. He had done law at Melbourne Uni, and he had a lot of friends still from those times, including the former Governor-General Sir Zelman Cowen, and they played bridge together regularly, and he slotted into life in Melbourne quite well.
I've got a friend whose elderly father moved back in with her at the age of 80, and he started dating. Did your dad start dating after he'd split with your mum?
He may have had a couple of dalliances when he was in Melbourne, yes.
That old devil, really. And how did you, as his daughter, feel about that? Were you a bit weirded out by that? It was like, oh, God, Dad, were you a bit like that?
No, I was happy to see him happy. He was very much enjoying his life in Melbourne, and that brought me immense pleasure.
You weren't confronted when he showed up with a girlfriend?
No, Dorothy was lovely.
Okay. And you also got involved in LGBT human rights, and that must have come from your own personal story, of course. Tell me a bit about that.
So I started to, I did my PhD on children's rights, and it was really focusing about what children learn at school. How much do they learn about human rights at school? And part of that was also how much do they learn about LGBTIQ rights? Because to me, we can't have a rights-respecting culture if people don't know about their rights. So at the time, there was, lots of debate going on about should same-sex couples be allowed to marry. And that affected me personally, and so I became part of that campaign, that advocacy. But also I read an article in the paper about the UK had just expunged convictions for men who had been given criminal records for engaging in consensual same-sex sex. And I wondered whether people in Australia, men in Australia were living with criminal convictions. Because
and were they?
Yes. Tasmania only decriminalised in 1997. So, and Victoria was in the 1980s. So absolutely, there were men who were, as I started to do research into this, I came across one man who hadn't changed jobs in decades because he was worried if he changed jobs, the new employer would do a criminal records check and he would have a conviction for indecent assault, which was the crime that was used to prosecute men who engaged in consensual same-sex sexual conduct.
Imagine having to explain yourself in such a thing to an employer as well. That'd
Absolutely. It's stifling.
Humiliating.
So I advocated for the expungement of those convictions and then an apology. And Dan Andrews, I remember sitting in Parliament in Victoria, Dan Andrews was the first leader in the world to publicly apologise to gays for the wrong of those laws. And so when I got that sort of taste of success, that my advocacy can help contribute to reform, and that was followed by marriage equality. And now Tasmania is the first jurisdiction in Australia to offer compensation to the men who had these convictions. And they're going to get a fixed amount depending on whether they were charged, whether they were convicted, and whether they were sentenced to time imprisonment.
And how about yourself when you came out as a ladies' woman, so to speak, to mum and dad? How did mum and dad take that?
My father took it absolutely fine. He said, I don't know any lesbians, but I know some gay men. And
you know lesbians now. Yeah.
he did then. Yeah. And he said his impression is that they always have to be very strong people because of the hate and the discrimination they're going to experience. My mother didn't take it so well. She stopped talking to me for a long, long time.
What was the basis for her objection, do you think? Was it just unseemly in her eyes or
yes,
religious or I don't know?
No, it definitely wasn't religious. It was about, I think, her standing in society. She had been, raised in upper middle class society in Melbourne and then in Queensland, and it didn't fit to have a gay daughter.
And was that wounding to you, or did you just go roll your eyes and go, oh, God? How did you respond to that?
No, it hurt. It would have hurt a lot more if it had been my father who rejected me because of how close we were. I did continue to try and patch things up with my mother. I did research that showed that it can take parents, years to adjust and to accept gay child. So I sent her a birthday card every year and just, kept the door open. But then it was over 30 years later that I learned that she was in hospital and that it had been a bit touch and go.
How did you learn that?
Through her sister, who lived in Melbourne, my aunt in Caulfield, and I was very close with her, and she let me know that my mum was in hospital.
Your mum hadn't let you know, but
No.
your auntie had.
My auntie had, and I decided that I did not want my mother to die without me having done everything that I could to try and reconcile. So without telling any of the family members, because I didn't want anyone to try and dissuade me from doing this, I jumped on a plane and I flew up to Brisbane, having called around all the hospitals to find out which one she was in. And on the flight up, I wrote a letter to her with the things that I wanted to say in case she didn't want to talk to me. And but I walked into her room in the hospital and I said hello to her and she said hi back, and I said, "Can I sit down?" She said yes. And I thought to myself, does she think I'm Danny, my sister, because we look quite alike? And then she said, "Oh, you just missed Danny. She was here a minute ago." It's like, okay, she knows who I am. And I stayed and we spoke for 6 hours.
What did you talk about?
We talked just about life, about what I'd been doing, about politics, about, life, really.
How was she when you told her? Like, you had an amazing life, and you're a real overachiever. Do you think she was proud, or trying not to be proud? How was she coping with the knowledge of what you'd done with your life?
No, she was definitely proud, and I think she knew a lot of it already because I had, for a time, been fairly high profile. I won the Telstra Businesswoman of the Year award, and I was in the newspapers, and people would say, "Oh, I saw Paula, done this or done that." So she knew a lot of what I had been doing, and I guess my aunt and siblings had shared as well with her what I was up to. And yes, and I got the impression she was very proud. People would come into the room, the doctors and the nurses, and she'd say, "Oh, this is my daughter Paula, she's visiting from Melbourne." And it was like the last 30 years of no communication had not happened. 2 weeks later, she was still in hospital. I went up again, and yes, we saw each other several times in the following years until she passed away.
You talk about reconciliation, but was there anything about you that needed to be forgiven? There wasn't really, was there? Did you have to smother that thought? I wonder. I
very much have a saying, meet people where they're at. And I don't think that my mother was going to be up for a deep and meaningful conversation about what had happened, about why it had happened. I think she was a product of her time, and times had changed, and she had now changed as well. And so whereas my sexual orientation was an issue back in 1989, it wasn't so much in 2019.
Not a big deal at all. No, so did she make peace with who you are, do you think?
I think she did, and I think she was really relieved that I had reached out to her. I don't think she was capable of doing it herself, but when I initiated it, it was warmly received.
There's a moment sometimes, I think, with parents where you realise they're getting, I don't know, sometimes you have to be the grown-up, don't you? And push through a whole lot of nonsense in order to end up in the better place in your relationship.
Things definitely do go full circle, I found, in life. When I was doing law in Queensland, I constantly got asked if I was related to Paula Gerber, and I hated it. And it was one of the reasons the minute I got admitted as a lawyer, I bought a one-way ticket and took off overseas, so I didn't keep living in his shadow.
Because there was a Paul Gerber and a Paula Gerber,
yes,
both practicing law in Queensland?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, and that's a very tiny legal community.
Exactly.
Right.
And then when my father moved to Melbourne when he was 80s, people started asking him if he was related to Paula Gerber. And he did not like that one bit.
Didn't he?
He did not. I said, that's what I had my whole life, so it's karma.
So cop it. Were you with your mum when she died?
I was. She was doing okay. She was out of hospital, and then suddenly she took a turn for the worse, and my sister called me and I said, should I come up? And she said, let's see, I'll let you know. And then later that night she seemed to be a bit better, and I thought often people get a bit better before the end. They have a bit of a uptick, and I thought I would not forgive myself if I didn't go up there. So I booked a flight at 6 o'clock in the morning. I arrived at 9 o'clock, and she passed away at 1 o'clock with all her children with her.
Was she aware of your presence?
She had woken up at one point and said Pog, which was my childhood nickname, and my brother and sister said, "Yep, she's coming. She'll be here soon." But she didn't regain consciousness after I was there. But
we don't know what people can and can't hear.
That's right, and feel. We were all around her, and hopefully she knew that.
So now you're a legal academic. You've got your PhD. You write articles and books about children's rights, human rights. Has your view of the law changed since you were that little girl following your dad around to jails and to court cases? Your view of what the law is and what it's good for and what it's not good for?
I think it's changed in that I no longer think it is the bee's knees, it's the answer to everything. But I still very much believe that if we don't try and change the law, we're not going to change society. So I will do my bit to advocate for law reform and for respecting the rights of all people, particularly vulnerable minorities. And I will leave it to others to do the, education of our children in schools. The teachers and the doctors and the people working in healthcare need to understand that they've got to respect the human rights of all people.
Is there a danger you get it backwards? Like you say you wanted to use the law to reform society. Shouldn't society reform and then the law catch up?
Well, I think it has to be in balance. It's like a seesaw. Sometimes it's more one way than the other, but ultimately for maximum results, the law and society need to be in sync. But if they're a little bit out, if law's pushing society along a bit, then I think that's okay, as long as society does catch up.
It's been really great speaking with you, Paula. A lot of fun too. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Paula Gerber, lecturer at Monash University Law School in human rights and a specialist in the rights of children. She's written several articles about human rights, and her most recent book is called Sex, Gender and Identity, Trans Rights in Australia. Today's conversation was produced by Meggie Morris on the lands of the Gadigal people. Executive producer was Nicola Harrison. I'm Richard Fidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.